Yeah, Mario was the one putting the music out in the parks and just threw that whole flavor out there for everybody to capture. And then that was like a fire under our forefathers of hip hop, and that's how I pretty much, jumped off from there. Yeah. So, it's not that one guy is wrong. It's not that Bam is wrong for saying that he's first, or that Herc is wrong for he's first, or that we're wrong for not saying that Mario's not first. They all played a key, integral role at the inception of the game. And without each one's contribution, hip-hop would not be what it is today. And that's the most important thing that needs to be understood. Everything else that fell behind it was just the way the game grew and the enhancements and how it became big and how it became a global crime. So when you look at it, when you look at the forefathers, just like the forefathers of this country, it was a handful, right? That's why they're on Mount Rushmore, right? So to me, they're our Mount Rushmore of hip hop. When you look at those things up there, you see Mario. I think Mario should be right there. Bam is there. Herc is there.
And not only that, and that's all we want. All we want is Mario to be mentioned among the founders, and all we want is Bronxdale to be mentioned.
Absolutely.
As the birthplace.
There's a lot of history in Bronx.
Yeah,
and Bronxdale, just like there is in Soundview, and that's like there is in Bronx River. Monroe. They all have. Each one has his own history and its place.
Right.
But they're all in the same community, primarily, where the key blocks of the foundation were built.
Right.
All of this I consider the same. Soundview, Monroe, Castle Hill, Bronx River, this whole little circle, this perimeter that we see here, it's all the same, man.
Right.
We just blocks from each other. We might have names for boundaries, but you know what? This is it. This is where it comes from, man. The shit got laid down here.
Right.
The roots are here.
Roots are here, right.
It's like a tree. The roots are in the ground, even though the tree sprouts up, right? And then it has branches.
But see, the thing is, the New York State recognizes 1520.
1526 as the place of
as the birthplace.
As the birthplace.
Right.
But that's because you know what? There've been people promoting that.
Right.
And that's what they've presented. Now, if you go ahead, it's just like history. History is always made to be rewritten as we discover new facts about it.
Right.
So, it doesn't mean that we can't go back into the historical book and say, now that we found all this information, this is where this building block came from, and it led to this being established.
Right.
Because really, that's the way the story should be written.
Right.
He wasn't the master of the hip-hop, but he was the master of playing the music outside and bringing that whole concept into play of a DJ.
Right.
Potentially an MC, even if it's just a guy announcing him and just calling out the different communities, the areas we lived at.
For the children who couldn't get into the clubs, the young teenagers.
And couldn't afford it, or for whatever it was, this was the way to expose the masses, no matter what, with no boundaries.
Right.
So, depending how you look at hip-hop and history, some people look at Bam because you know what? That's the age that they came in, so that's what they know from the point of their inception to go on.
Right.
But if you're an older cat, you really can take the time down line further down and really expand and really lay down more of the foundation.
So when it really first started,
when it really first started and what it came to. And that's where the debate is at. But what people have to recognize is like, go back to the cat and you say, Bam, Bam, you the man, you this, that, and the other. Right? Whose stereo did you use?
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
So, did you pay a couple $, just to be able to get on and put out all the beats you discover and put that flavor into it and then make it to what it is today?
Right.
Sometimes what happens is, sometimes we get so big and we forget to recognize those that helped us get up along the way.
Right.
And everybody should always give credit to who is due.
Right.
I don't consider myself a ghetto superstar, but you know what? If you walk through the hood, I've been around here long enough where a lot of people know me for sports, know me for a lot of things. And they'll tell you I've helped a lot of people get up and out. But I've touched a lot of families. I know a tremendous amount of families. I grew up with brothers and sisters all my life. I've dated sisters all my life. Girls, sisters, it's all good.
Right.
But the bottom line is how do we touch each other?
Right.
In what way did I leave my imprint on you in your life? Right? Because it's like a fossil. When you step in the ground, all of a sudden it gets hard. Now that imprint is there. And then it gets a stone and it fossilizes, and then thousands of years later we discover them all of a sudden when we're digging something up and we find it there to let us know that, you know what, before you was here, there was somebody else before you. And that's really what the key is to all of this, is recognize and give credit to where it's due. You can be the founder of this particular, but remember who jumped you off, who ignited you, who excited you.
Right.
You know, which is something that people forget. Who excited me to want to DJ? You know, I liked Flash when I was growing up. You know, I followed him. Grand Wizard Theodore, going to the Audubon, Ballroom, and all that stuff across there. That was great and everything. Then as I got older, I got exposed to Larry Levan, you know, and house music and the underground sound and club music. And Larry, down to this day, is voted as the #1 DJ in the world because he gets credit for inventing the remix. Now you can have other guys that say, well, I did the remixes, I did the scratches, this, that, and the other. But they didn't call it the remix back in the day.
Right.
But it really was a remix, right?
Right.
Because you were taking different records and putting them together to create a sound, and then with an MC on there, talking over it, it's there. So you could call that a remix also. So, you know, it all just depends where you go and how you define it. But, you know, when you look back at the beginning of it and at the concept, give credit to the man who somewhat put the concept out there of bringing the turntables and the music and the speakers out to the parks and, you know, blessing everybody with the top sounds or the top 40 sounds and a couple of things that he discovered around the way through record pools that were just starting to be formed, and he was getting records and putting the sound out there, and people still not calling disco what it was because they wasn't familiar with it, and that whole sound was evolving, you know, and he was there, and when that was evolving, and I was saying, we was playing too.
Who's that?
Mario. Oh, you know who that is. Who's Mario? You ain't gonna tell me that you ever heard Bam play and let Bam throw on Van McCoy, do the hustle, and everybody's hustling.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Right.
But I'm not gonna knock Bam because Bam's taken plenty of rock records with breaks in them and have made them prominent. Bob James is a great example of that. That Bam took his thing and put Bob James on the board when where half our people never even knew who Bob James was until he came out with those cuts. So, you know, Aerosmith, all of that, you know, all of that is all new. So, you know, the game is big. You know, the game is bigger than one person, you know. The game is many components into one to make what we now call the hip-hop culture.
Right.
But the hip-hop culture is a diversity of many pieces that were brought together to make one giant component.
Right.
And that's what we live by today. Then, you know, you get into East Coast, West Coast, all that nonsense. You know what? It's hip-hop. We do it for the love of the game, for the love of the sound, and what it's for. We should not here be rivaling each other and stuff like that. Because we all try to do the same thing. So, I always found that to be real stupid because what it did is it hurt us and it gave the negative concept of what it's about. And it hurts the game. Because the global grind is strong. So imagine if the negativity wasn't there, how much bigger the game would be. Because a lot of boundaries or a lot of doors that were closed because of the negativity would have never been closed and would have been open. And those would have been even bigger springboards to jump the game even further than where it's at today. But the bottom line, the game is still there. It still has its identity. And what we're trying to do is we're piecing the identity in the right way.
Right.
But you know, don't forget, there was a jump off somewhere. And that jump off was right here in Bronxdale with that.